Hey guys, in this video, I'm going to explain the Airtable API reference. So I'm gonna go through here and give you like a framework to how to understand all these parts and how do they fit in building an Airtable app. Now, this isn't an Airtable API like if you're going from like Zapier or you're building your own thing and pushing it out to a server. No. It's like these things, an API reference for these. Like if you're in your base and you go to apps and you're like, hey, add an app, and you're like, build a custom app, and you're like, do one of these hello world things. So you can do like, and this isn't like scripting. This is like the most intense level of building a sweet custom app. Now, before you say, hey, John, why are you doing such clickbaity content now? I'll tell you, it's because I'm an idiot and I had to build one of these apps, and I come here and I struggled for a very long time just trying to understand like, wait, like what is all this crap and how am I supposed to put all this together into an app? So that's what we're going to do in very, very simple terms. I'm going to explain how you do this. Okay, so let's get into it. So when you come in here to the API reference, you can go to the guides and examples, and that's all helpful. But, the meat and potatoes of this is this stuff right here. And I have all these collapsed because I want to take you through, give you a really big picture, okay? So you come in here and we've got three divisions. We've got models, testing, and UI. Okay, let's start getting some of these off the list that are like obvious, right? So first of all, we've got our UI. So let's like close these things up, right? We've got our components, which is like the buttons. So that's like when you come in here, here's an app I made, and here's just like the UI of the app. So when these components are those different things like icons, inputs, okay, that's just like, like HTML stuff. Down here, we're going to skip hooks because that's one of the a little more complicated ones that we're going to have to deal with. And we've got colors, these are just like utility functions, okay? So we can just close those up because those aren't essential. We've got the style system, which is just kind of the specific like style stuff that Airtable provides to you. So that's the style system. We can get rid of that. We're not worrying about that. That's not like a main feature, right? Okay, so here are our hooks right here. And this is a React thing, but don't worry, you don't need to know React. I'm going to explain it. These are very confusing to me. So how to think about hooks is they're like event listeners. So if you've done any like web programming stuff, you're like constantly adding event listeners to stuff. You're like, hey, I want to listen when someone like clicks something or submits a form or hovers or whatever, and then you like do something in response to that. Well, that's what hooks are, right? They're different events that happen. But the other thing is, these are just normal functions, okay? There's nothing well, there is something fancy about them, but they're just normal functions. And the app, they will fire off the function. They will use the function at a specific time. So you can look down here and you can kind of like figure out, like, let's just click on the first one, like useBase right here. It's a hook for connecting React component. Just ignore all that crap if it doesn't make any sense. This returns a base. So it returns. So it's just a normal function, right? And it returns a base, right? And so what's a base? A base is like this whole thing right here. It returns like that whole thing. It returns a base instance and will re-render. So that's it's going to keep calling that function whenever the base's schema changes. So don't worry about schema. It's just like, kind of like metadata stuff in there. But it's like every time that changes, it's going to be like, hey, let's run this function again, just like an event listener, right? Hey, when a click happens, then you run this function, that callback function that you do, right? But this kind of like does it for you. So these are like pre-set up event listeners. Now, what does it return? Well, this one returns a base. Here's a cursor. You can kind of guess what that does, right? Or, and this returns a cursor. You can see here down in a function signature, right? Or you can see like records ID, right? A hook for working with sets of record IDs from your table, right? Automatically handles loading of data. This hook doesn't re-render, so this one doesn't re-render when the data inside the record changes, only when the records are added, removed, or ordered. Okay, so when records, like an individual line, a row, when that changes, then this function, this hook will be sent off, and what you will get, let's look. Oh, we'll get an array down here. This is our function signature. We're telling what is this thing? Getting an array with record IDs in it, right? So whatever changes, we'll get that in an array. Okay, so we've got these hooks here. They're called hooks because they can hook into the application in different places. Because the fundamental thing about apps is that you're getting data, you're messing with it, and then you're putting it back or sending it somewhere or whatever, right? So it's doing all this stuff. It has all this business logic. You want to be able to hook into it and do stuff, right? Okay, so these are hooks, right? If whenever you want to do something, you'll use these hooks. But notice here, and this one up here, models is the other thing. So up here we got a lot of models, and this was confusing for me. But these models up here are going to be in sort of classical software design. You have this naming, this nomenclature, this system where you call applications they have three main parts. They have models, MV, views, and C, controllers. And the view is obvious. That's just the UI, your buttons, your layout. The controller is what they call the business logic, right? It's hey, when you do this action, do this. When someone submits a form, here's what I want you to do. I want you to grab the name and the first name and the last name, and combine them together and send them over to here. This all that controller is the logic, right? And then the M, which has always been confusing to me, the model is the data, okay? The model is the data. Now, that's confusing, at least for me. But it gets a little bit more confusing here when we come into these docs, because when you come in here, these aren't just data things, right? They can be classes, or sometimes they're just normal objects. Okay, and so let's just look down here, and these are going to be things. Often you can reference them outside of hooks, but you'll often use these in conjunction with hooks. Because notice if we go down here to our hooks, we come down to our hooks and we see, okay, this is we're just trying to understand this. Oh, it returns a base, right? So like I said, this is just an event listener. So when something happens with the base, we're going to call, not us, React is going to call this function, and out of that function, we're going to get a base. Now, of course, you're what the heck is a base? And that's when you turn to your model. You'd be oh, I come over here, and this will tell me about what a base is. The class base, right? And so if you just remember programming land, what's a class? Because sometimes classes and objects are confusing. A class is just a template, right? So it's when we make an object with these properties and these functions, these methods on them, here's a template I want to take. So you can, use the example of a car. And so let's say I want to make a car. So I'll have a class of car, right? And say, hey, whenever you make an object, a car, make sure it has a color, a brand, right? All of these features. So when you create a car out of this class, so we've got this base class, and this base class, every time you make a table, right? Or I'm sorry, I even used it wrong. Every time you make a new base, that base will get its template, will get its information, its properties, its functions from this base class, okay? And that's what will be returned to us, not the class, remember, because these are instantiated. So this particular base will be instantiated, will be created based on the template of base that we're looking at here. Okay, so something changes with your base. Hey, React is I'm going to use this function right here, and whoop, here's a base. Cool. I want to know what to do with it. So you come over to the base model right here. And this pattern you'll use over and over and over again. So like anything down here, be like, I don't know, you'll probably use records, right? That's one of the most common things you do. You like reference stuff in your Airtable. And so you use records. Well, what's records? So let's just like, I don't want to read all this stuff. Let's just come down to a function signature and we get returned an array of records, right? So we can click on there, or we can just come up to here, be like, because we want to know like what's a record. It's not a string, right? This is an instance of a class. It's a templated thing, and we come over here to record, and so now we look at our record and we say, okay, so now I know what this thing looks like and the kind of things I can do with it, the properties it has, the information it has, all the stuff like that, right? So this is the fundamental thing. So you go through all of these models, and these are just like types of data, like types of objects that you're going to use, and this kind of makes sense because you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to use a table. I'm going to want to reference my table. I'm going to reference a record and a specific field, right? These are like fields up here, like length, right? And so you'll use all of those things. Now, there's we're almost there. We almost have a big picture of these things. But some of these things, right? Because if we look down here, these are classes, right? Here's like class field extends, and just for like the quick refresher, it means like, hey, this has a class above it, because these are like it's like one big hierarchical tree where you got like an object and it's getting properties and functions from this template up here, but that template also has a template that it was made from. So like we've got our field like template, right? But that's also is getting stuff, is inheriting stuff from our abstract model. So you can really go in there and be like, what? Because like if you look in this field, it's going to tell you all this crap that you have access to. But that's not all the crap you have access to, because you have also all the crap from our abstract model, right? Okay, so that's all great. So we've got all these things. This all makes sense. These models are going to be essentially like objects. They're the templates, but let's just shorthand. They're just objects. Like we're going to encounter these things, and we want to understand these things. Okay, that's cool. But here's another thing. This is, if you look up here, we're going to see, oh, it's a model. Oh, these are models. But we come up here and we're like an interface. We're like, what the heck? What's an interface? Well, this interface is just going to be an object with a bunch of functions that you can use in it. And I'm creating a course now over all this, and so we'll get into the details now. But if you're going to have all of these things inside your aggregator, so it's like a utility thing, right? You need to do some calculation. You need to look at the total size. That's one of the aggregators. But this is, if you log this out, this is just going to be an object, a normal object with properties on it. Okay. So that's the big picture. You got more stuff down here, but this is under the model. So you got query results because you're going to constantly getting back like results from cells inside of your table, and you're going to and those cells have a specific thing too. So we get a whole section here about query results. Now, you might think with seeing this that it's like, oh, query results is like a different type of thing. It's really not, right? It's just to say, hey, you're going to be using with these a lot, so they put it in a different category. But these still should be under models, because these are still just going to be objects. They just have properties and methods on them that you can use, okay? So this is nothing fancy right here. Okay, it's really fancy, but it's not like fancy, if you know what I'm saying. And then we've got some advanced stuff, which you don't have to worry about until you're getting like super technical with this, because remember, we saw this before. It's like abstract model, right? So that's like the inheriting way up here, way up here. You can't even see it. It's like beyond here. Like I'm grabbing it right now. It's way up here. Okay, you don't need to worry about that. I've never dealt with it. Okay, and then the last thing here is testing. So, like you're going to build your app, and then you're going to want to like test it to make sure it's here, to make sure it works. Honestly, most of the time when I'm doing testing, all the time. I'm not using any of these things because I'm just testing it. It's a little app. If you get like bigger apps and you want to launch it out into the stratosphere, you're going to want to get into testing here. But for most of the things probably that you're going to be making, you don't have to worry about testing. Okay, so that's the big picture of how to understand the API reference for Airtable. I'm sorry it's so clickbaity. Let me know if you got any questions. Also, please, if you're interested in this, I am making a course on making Airtable custom apps. So if you'd be interested in that, please subscribe because I'm going to announce it here when it's done. Let me know if you've got any questions about the API references. I hope that helps, and I'll see you later.